This is the Lucie Beatrix podcast. On my show, I talk about my past life as a fashion model, where I was on the covers of magazines, to my very different life now, where I'm a competitive athlete running fast and far, sharing stories about my experiences along the way. Today's episode, I want to check in with you guys as a running coach, talking about how to get ready for your marathon, and more specifically, how to go about tapering. So a lot of you runners out there are getting ready to run the New York Marathon in just 2 weeks. And so I want to share with you guys what worked for me as far as tapering and how to both get your head on straight, as well as just how to dial back with your mileage and go about fueling and hydrating, all the moments leading up to the big day. So let's get into it. So as you guys know, I'm a running coach, and I've been coaching for the past few years, and I've coached a handful of athletes towards the marathon. And what I understand about tapering is both applied to the people that I coach, as well as what I've seen work, and also what worked for me after the Chicago Marathon a few weeks ago, where I ran a 2:44 marathon, and accredit a lot of that to how I went into the race or how I tapered. Now, let's get into the more scientific details on what I think you should do as far as mileage and how to get your body in the best standings to go into the race without feeling like you're without feeling overcooked or undercooked. Because really, the beauty of the taper is that you want to just dial back enough, but not too much. So finding out that right balance of how much to not run, to make sure that you go to the starting line of your race feeling fresh, but also not going too far in that direction where you feel like when you show up, you haven't really run in a while. So let's talk about how much mileage I think you guys should cut back on if you're tapering. So say you're 2 weeks out exactly from your marathon, whether you're running the New York Marathon or you've got another marathon coming up, or even just to have this knowledge in your back pocket for whenever it is that you are planning to race a marathon. My rule of thumb is that you dial back 75%, the 2 weeks out, so the second to last week before the actual race. You've got 2 weeks till race day. That second to last week of your entire marathon journey, I say you run 75% of what your peak weekly mileage was. So for me, I was running 100-mile weeks. That meant that the second week out before the race, I was running a 75-mile week. So that's 25% less miles in that week going into than the actual race week. Now, the thing I was just alluding to before was this idea that you don't want to dial back too much on mileage, because you want to still feel like you've got the fitness. You're not going to lose fitness, but this idea that you still need to have a little bit of mileage to insulate all the training that you've been doing. But I've also thought to err on the side of doing a little bit less than you want to do. So maybe it's more like 65 to 70% of your weekly mileage. As long as it's not more than half of what your weekly mileage. So say you're running 100-mile weeks, which is a lot. I think most people are probably running anywhere between 40 and 50-mile weeks in their peak mileage for the marathon. You don't want to just cut that to half for the 2 weeks out. I would say stick with more of 3/4 amount the mileage of what you've been doing for that 2 week out week. So, if you're running 50 miles a week, maybe you're running anywhere from 29, 30 miles the week, 2 weeks out, maybe a little bit more than 30. That's what I would say. But it's also really important to go by feel. So say you're just really exhausted and those high mileage weeks have been getting to you. All you can think about is how much you can't wait for this whole thing to be over. That's how you're supposed to feel 2 weeks out from your race. You're supposed to be kind of like, wow, this has been a lot. I know that's how I was feeling. But so it's also important to listen to yourself and say, you know what, maybe I need a little extra rest. Those extra 1 or 2 days of rest are only going to serve you when you get to the starting line if you're feeling super spent. If you're not feeling super spent, then yeah, get the miles in, just as long as it's not above 75% of the weekly mileage that was at your peak week. So that said, that's how to dial back the 2 weeks out. Then say it's the race week. So this is the week of your actual race. That's where I say less is so much more. Not even less is more, but less is so much more. And this is something that I'm so glad that my training partner told me leading into the Chicago Marathon, where something he said was that he's wished he had done less mileage going into the actual marathon week. And I believe that. I stuck with that. I stuck with what he told me, where he said, run significantly less. And we're talking maybe, I would say like 25%. No, more like 30% of the weekly mileage at your peak week on your race week. So for me, that meant I went from running, I guess is the best way to portray this, is like during my peak weeks, I was running anywhere from 10 to 15 miles a day with a 20-mile long run on the weekends. During the actual week, those runs were half of what I would do. During race week, I was just running half of that. So what I would suggest to you, whoever's listening to this, is basically run, I would say, every other day, if not even that. But like get yourself to half of what you were normally doing during your typical training weeks for the race week. And the other thing about this is that, say you are a little bit more advanced and you're doing some speed workouts and you're touching marathon pace on race week, I do think it's important to touch marathon pace, maybe on the Tuesday leading into the race week, but just a little bit. I would say if you're going to do a speed workout or something, you do half of what you would have normally done during speed workouts. So, getting out to the track and doing just a couple 400s or 800s at race pace, not any faster. I think that's a good idea. But I also think that like this idea of just like keeping yourself so contained and chomping at the bit is everything on the actual race week. With the marathon, since it's so long, it just, as much as you can possibly get in the bank as far as rest that race week is so important. And that brings me to this idea of reminding yourself that walking still counts. So the taper needs to include how much you're walking around. And I'm talking about the race expo, because for me, I was at the race expo for Chicago the day before. Probably bad planning on my part. I don't know what I was thinking, honestly, because that was a lot of walking. And I was getting a little bit anxious walking around the expo, picking up my bib, picking up my bag with my shirt in it and everything that I needed for the race, and getting some extra gels. That stuff, I think, is a lot more energy than you think it is. So I've mentioned this before, but if you're going to the race expo a couple days before the actual event, I would say as far out as you can possibly go to the expo, if you can go that Monday of your race week, do that, because it's better to just get it over with and not waste your extra energy walking around. And I also think that energetically, just looking around and seeing so much hype about the race is a lot to take in. I think you really want to save that for race day. Don't get me wrong. It's good to be excited and it's good to experience it. You've worked so hard and you want to go see all the things that have to do with the marathon that you're running, but try to put that far enough away from the actual race as you can. So, between walking around and trying to taper your mileage, that's just a small part of the taper. I think there's still so much more to think about as far as like tapering your mindset and making sure that you're not thinking about the race more than you need to. So the week of the race for the Chicago Marathon, I definitely was thinking a lot about the race, and I couldn't help it, because if you're training for a marathon, you're putting so much time and energy into this actual event. So I would say try to taper your headspace from running. Let yourself think about it for during your little shakeouts throughout race week, but also let yourself think about all the other things. And one way I actually had this kind of built into my routine, or my race week, was I ended up going on a trip right after the Chicago Marathon. I jumped on a flight that night, a red eye, to Iceland, and then was in Europe all week, the week after the race. And thinking about the trip helped me before the race, thinking about how I wasn't totally thinking about that. Like I could have my head in somewhere thinking about something else that had nothing to do with the actual race or the running. So it's important to like meditate on your race and focus and go into it with a strategy, but don't spend too much time thinking about the race. I think it's also important just to diversify where you're putting your mental energy getting into that marathon mindset. So another thing that I think is very important to think about as we taper is how you fuel. This is something that I think is really interesting. I was noticing, so when I was running my 100-mile weeks, getting ready for the Chicago Marathon, I was eating everything. I was eating a lot. We're talking thousands of calories a day because I should have been. I mean, I'm burning through so many. And that didn't really stop when I got closer and closer to the Chicago Marathon. I kind of like that same week leading into the race, we're running a fraction of the mileage, I was still eating kind of what I normally do. And I was hungry for it. And I think there was almost like a lag in like all those miles for so many weeks. It was catching up with me. And I was like really hungry. And I noticed myself going to the grocery store, getting food for dinner, eating it all, thinking it was going to last me a few days, and then like eating it all in one night, and then noticing I want to still get more food. I was really hungry. And I thought for a second, I actually talked to my therapist about this. I was like, I think I'm eating too much, like leading into the race, like the couple days before. And he was like, there's no way that you are. Like you've been putting your body through so much vigorous exercise for so many months that you do need to keep eating that same high calorie diet of like nourishing food to then go into this event strong. And the reason I'm emphasizing this is I think it's something that we need to hear. I think that sometimes people worry so much about race weight. I've heard people within circles that I'm in saying things of like how they didn't want to gain weight during the taper and they're worried about their weight. I think if you ever hear that, I want you to hear my voice saying, no, don't do that. Think about how you need to fuel yourself ahead of time and have that extra cushion. Because you do want a little extra in the tank for going after your marathon. Truly. And I think that that's what gave me an edge. And that's what gave me this like confidence to be out there and, 20 something miles deep go, yeah, I still got a little in the tank and I'm going to finish this thing strong and not bonk. So I think if anything gave me that extra edge, it was the fact that I ate so much that week leading into the race. And so don't taper your calories. You can taper everything else. You can taper your mileage. You can taper your mindset, but don't taper your calories. That's just my thought. This is my own anecdotal experience. And so, yeah, I think that as you find yourself with like the taper crazies, as I've mentioned in other episodes, when I was going through the taper, getting ready for Chicago, I also think it's important to not like fall into the rhetoric that you're supposed to be feeling all these aches and pains and ghost injuries and things that might pop up because you haven't been running the way that you were. I would say don't buy all that. Let yourself enjoy the taper. I remember as I was going into the taper, I was like, this is actually kind of fun. Why does everyone complain about the taper and what are you going to do with all this extra energy? You can think of things to do. I know I did. I was like reading more and watching things that I was catching up on that I didn't have time for during the marathon training cycle. And I would say just try to like lean into the taper and be like, this is like kind of nice. It's like a little vacation before the big event. But I'm kind of a contrarian with like how runners act. So I would say like that's very me to say like, don't let the taper crazies get to you. They're not real. I think they can be really fun. And if anything, it's a nice reward after all the hard work you've done. You've earned it. And so eat everything and lean into this like rest period. So I hope this helps. I hope that if you are sitting there with a little wondering about like, oh, where should my mileage be? Or, what should I be eating? That this gives you a little bit of an idea of what I did. I also want to emphasize that I'm kind of available to talk to you about this stuff. So if you have questions about tapering, just message me on Instagram. I'm at Lucie Beatrix, LucieBeatrix. And I answer my DMs pretty regularly. So if you have a question about tapering, let me know. I'll try to get back to you as soon as I possibly can. I really hope to see you guys out there at the New York Marathon, if that's what the race that you are running or whatever marathon you're running. Yeah. Until next time, just be fast. Just win.